Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation here on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Networks. Of course, this is the show that talks about everything Star Trek and the Orville. And of course, right now, the topic on everybody's mind is Star Trek Discovery, the final season. And we are here to discuss episode 5 of season 5, Mirrors, which I was kind of questioning that name, but we have a very good explanation for why this show was titled. But I cannot go through wormholes. I can't deal with dark matter. I can't deal with mirror universes without having a top-notch crew. So, and I've got one lined up for us. Of course, our top security officer, sometimes Captain Kevin Reisel, is still off on an away mission to Lansdowne Under, but that's not to fear, because I have got a top-notch holographic captain and ship's counselor with me, the wonderful, as always, Amy Nelson.
Well, hello there.
How are you, Miss Amy?
Doing great.
So, but we're not done yet, because she's still out of sick bay, and we're happy for it. And I know she's been practicing on the big red button to shoot some things down, and she always is going to bring the science with us anyway. She's our favorite science officer, the wonderful Haley Stoddard.
Hello. Yes, I continue to be out of sick bay, and I'm very excited about that. I'm not going to lie.
We love it too, because we are here to talk Star Trek Discovery Season 5. Guys, we're halfway through this season already. That doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Much like Discovery.
Yep. Let's fly. And of course, you can find the Union Federation podcast, of course, on the Fandom Podcast Network, as well as the BQN Network. What's going on over at BQN, Amy? What are you assimilating this week?
Yeah, we've got some fun things going on over there. Trek Experts Quiz is going strong. Just had a new episode drop there. Those are always so fun to guess and yell at the YouTube or whatever you're listening to. And I know that answer. Ooh, I don't know that one.
I know the BQN Discord is just like growing like rapid fire.
Yeah, that's been really fun enjoying that. We've got a lot of channels on there and lots of non-Trek chatter as well. So,
well, we are talking about Star Trek Discovery, and it's the final season, and it's been an interesting ride so far. And guys, we're halfway through. So I want to ask you, before we get started into our discovery of this week's episode, at the halfway point, where do you feel we are at with Discovery? Amy?
I feel like it was super high, and then, I had issues with last week's episode. This week, I enjoyed it, but I don't know what I'm missing. I haven't had time to really think about it. How are you feeling? I'm feeling I'm in a slump right now.
I kind of feel like we started off real hot, and the last 2 episodes have kind of slowed things down, and it gets me worried about, are we heading towards that same Discovery problem? Everything is going to be trying to throw it into the last episode again. I mean, granted, we still have 5 episodes left, but I'm just kind of feeling that way. What about you, Haley?
Yeah, it's been a slow burn for me, in my opinion so far, because the first episode didn't necessarily pull me in right away. And I was like, okay, I'm here for the ride, but I don't know. And then since then I'm like, okay, I'm still on the ride. I'm still on this journey. Let's see where this ship is going. But I don't know. I'm liking things, and I'm liking bits of things, but then I'm also not liking other things. And like you, Kyle, I'm worried about the whole let's cram everything in the last 2 episode and a half again as well. And especially where we know, I know they didn't know that this was the last season, but this is the last season, and it makes you wonder how they're going to leave things. And if they leave it open-ended to more, anyway, it's going to be really weird.
It is going to be very strange, and I'm not quite sure where we're headed with this, but we will be finding out, and that is going to be very interesting. But we've got a lot of things to talk about here on the Union Federation. So let's engage that quantum drive. Guys, one of the things is, the news has been kind of in between, but I do have an interesting piece of news that has dropped here, and that is this. The guide to the Orville hardcover announced by Seth MacFarlane himself, coming out September, 25th of 2024. It's Orville news is always good. And Amy, have you teleported somebody in on me?
Oh, Haley, have you?
Are you or one of you?
I'm not in charge of teleporters. Sorry, I do the pew pews.
Pew pew. It's a pew pew. It's a pew. Believe that.
Wait,
Dan Davidson from Trek Geeks.
Hi, everybody. A little birdie told me you were having a conversation tonight, and I just had to come in and say hi.
Yay!
How's everybody doing?
We are doing well. Thank you for popping in. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It is great to see everybody.
Wonderful. So
yes, we were just actually having a little Orville discussion because Seth MacFarlane announced this week the guide to the Orville being published by Dark Horse Comics, a hardcover compendium guide to everything that is the Orville. And of course, we love our Trek around here, but we love the Orville as well. I think a lot of people are going to be putting this down for a possible Christmas present.
Awesome.
Oh, this is just so wonderful. I really would like to get this. I'm very excited. It's got like technical details. I mean, I have a couple technical manuals and blueprints of Star Trek and stuff. So this is just, again, we know Seth MacFarlane loves Star Trek. And this is, again, evidence of that because this is just bleeding Star Trek. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, with all the still unconfirmed rumors of a season 4, maybe this is going to be something that's going to lead into that. So something to be very excited about. But you know what, guys, we are here to talk other things too. And what that means is spoiler alert. We're going to be talking about everything that happened in Star Trek Discovery Episode 5 Mirrors. Dan, are you ready to talk a little Discovery with us?
I am. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Well, then let's hit that transporter and get into our first away. And of course, what that means is that we are talking about the Episode 5 Mirrors. And Miss Nelson, are you up to doing a little Admiral's Log this week?
Sure thing. So Mal and Locke have entered an unstable wormhole. Burnham and Book enter in a shuttle and find the debris of Mal and Locke's ship next to the ISS Enterprise, obviously from the Mirror universe. The ship was brought to this universe by refugees escaping the ruthless Terran Empire, and one of the refugees went on to join the 24th century scientist team. She hid her piece of the map on the ship, which Burnham retrieves along with the next clue. Book attempts to reason with Mal using his connection to her father, but she is unconvinced because her father abandoned her as a child. Burnham and Book appeal to Mal and Locke's love for one another, but Locke reveals that there is an Araga bounty on them because he betrayed his people, the Breen, so that he could be with Mal. They hoped to sell the progenitor's technology to escape the bounty and move to a peaceful colony in the Gamma Quadrant. Mal accidentally detaches the shuttle, forcing Burnham and Book to pilot the Enterprise out of the wormhole with help from Rayner and the Discovery crew. And then Mal and Locke escape in a warp pod.
So we're going to kind of kick off with talking about our initial thoughts on this episode, guys, because this was an interesting one. It kind of gives us some backstory on Mal and Locke. We've got a few other interesting things going on, but I just real quick, from my opinion, is there's interesting things in this episode, but the main story was not the most interesting aspect of this episode. There's a lot of side stuff going on that I would like to know more about than I actually would about as much backstory as we got on Mal and Locke, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Dan, you are our guest here. give us your first impressions of this episode.
Anybody who listens to Trek Geeks knows that I love the Mirror universe. So when I caught the rumors about what was going to be happening, I was very excited. And I gotta admit, I was not thrilled with how this episode turned out with regards to that connection. It was good that they had a couple of blips about what was going on. They mentioned Mirror Universe Saru and his starting the whole process of this revolt. It was just, in my opinion, it was a way for the Discovery creators and powers that be to borrow the Strange New World set for an episode and make it look really cool.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you, and I got some interesting facts coming up about some of the things they did with this episode in our trivia. But Amy, what about you? What did you think of this episode?
I've watched it 3 times, and every time I still there's pieces and information that should be story A that's buried. I definitely, the whole Locke thing and his what was that bounty that's on him, Eriga, of course haven't heard that before, but I definitely want to know more about that. And yeah, it was hidden so deep within that. And again, the Rainer coming around, figuring out that he's going to listen to his crew and they're going to go around and shoot ideas off of how to, not let the aperture close. It just is so predictable. And I'm trying to like it. And then I'm trying, but there's just something that is boring me with that whole storyline of him becoming a part of this crew.
Haley, what about you? What did you think? What were your first impressions of this week's episode?
So I just watched this before recording. So listeners, with my autoimmune, I have brain fog, and some days are worse than others. So I watch right before, and I don't take notes so that it's fresh on my brain because otherwise it could be gone. So Amy, you mentioned last week that you were it was so predictable. I felt a lot of what happened in this episode super predictable. So the whole book and Amal talking, I was yeah, please, I know where this is going to go. All right, let's play it out, which is fine, and it was nice to see it happen finally, right? Rather than just hinting at it, which is why Book's been on the ship. But that was predictable, Burnham trying to relate to Locke. That was predictable. I think the best part of this episode was getting their backstory and understanding why these two are together, and getting that little bit more of the Breen and adding some more story to the Breen was really cool. This whole idea that they're not necessarily solid, but they can be if they choose to be, and how that happens, I'm intrigued. That was probably the best part about it.
That's interesting. Let me jump in on that comment if I can real quick, Haley. One of the things that I was initially, I guess I could say kind of pissed about is with Deep Space Nine, you had a fear of the Breen. You didn't know what was under those masks. The language that they used was just really just kind of scary. I was kind of that's it when they took their masks off. And I kind of wish that part of who Elias's character is, who don't get me wrong, Elias Defexis is doing a great job as Locke. It was a little bit kind of a deflation for what we've come to know the Breen ever since Deep Space Nine. One of the things that I thought was incredible with the Breen with this episode is this is 1,000 or how many years in the future is it from Deep Space Nine time? They still have pretty much the exact same uniforms that they did in Deep Space Nine, and I really like that the writers and the costume departments kept that aspect of the Breen the same. But while the special effects are kind of cool, I'm not sure I can get that mint jelly bean green out of my mind ever again after it was revealed that they were actually the Breen.
I think for me, that's one of the more frustrating aspects I've always had with Discovery is that they're very good about finding some very cool concepts that maybe weren't that much explored in Star Trek. But then it's sometimes I guess the best way I can put it is sometimes it feels like they half-ass it. Like, okay, we could have taken this so much further, and we just we're good at the point we're at. We're not, and it's just it gets a little frustrating with Discovery.
It's funny that you say that, especially for this season, guys, because it's my viewpoint that with this being the last season, I don't know if this was a decision before or after the decision to make it the final season took place. I think there's been budget cuts like slashed in this season. Yeah. And that half-ass idea is bleeding through very easily with just about everything that's going on, unfortunately. Episode 4, I thought was fantastic. The rest of the season so far has, unfortunately for me, been a disappointment because I love Discovery.
Yeah. I think there was even a Paramount. It's either today or tomorrow. There's a Paramount board meeting where I think we might get some interesting news out of that here shortly. But I appreciate everybody's first impressions on this. But I did a little digging and I found a little Star Trek trivia. I'm going to warp us into that. So there was some interesting trivia that actually ties into Discovery itself in this episode, besides a few other factors. But I'm going to recruit Amy and Haley to help me out a little bit with this trivia. But I'm going to read the first one because one of the first pieces of trivia is wormhole in the burn. The wormhole that Book and Burnhams have to enter is unstable, which describes most wormholes featured in Star Trek. But in this case, it is suggested that the matter-antimatter reactions in this wormhole were caused by the burn. Of course, the burn was the galaxy-changing event in the backstory of Season 3 of Discovery when in 3069, every warp core in the galaxy detonated. Warp cores used matter-antimatter reactions to do their thing. Very interesting thing there. I like how they're kind of pulling back from previous Discovery seasons to create some of the issues still. They're like, they just didn't solve everything. And I like that aspect that they're carrying over ramifications. So I thought that was interesting. But Haley, can you tell me a little about Mir Spock?
Sure. Burnham mentions that the science station on the Enterprise was, quote, my brother's station. This, of course, refers to Spock, who in this universe did briefly work at this exact station. Burnham says, I'm sure he was just as ruthless as the rest, though, which, as we know, is not true. Mirror Spock sparred Prime Kirk in Mirror Mirror, such a good episode, and then became the leader of the entire Empire. In fact, when Book reads the story of this version of the Enterprise, he says the Terran High Chancellor was killed for trying to make reforms. In the Deep Space Nine episode crossover, we learn that the leader of the Terran Empire was Spock, and that Spock trying to reform the Terran Empire led to Earth being taken over in the 24th century by the Klingon-Cardassian Alliance. I thought that was a nice, little nod to Spock in this episode. It was brief, and that was great. Mm-hmm. I think that was perfect.
Yeah, I like that too. And because I like the fact that they had that moment too where she's like, this was my brother's workstation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Amy, can you tell me about Saru and the Mirror Universe from Discovery Season 3?
Yeah, so Book mentions that the crew of the ISS Enterprise escaped with the help of a Kelpian slave turned rebel leader. Who could that be? Obviously, Saru. But referencing Terra Firma Part 2 from Season 3, if you remember. In that episode, Georgiou went back to the Mirror Universe and created this pocket timeline where she died at a different time and Saru was freed to become a rebel leader. At the time, it wasn't clear if this changed the timeline of the Mirror Universe or the timeline of Discovery Season 1, but the mention of Mirror Saru, who is a rebel, suggests that some version of that timeline might have occurred after all. So I've got a lot of questions with this whole ISS thing. Because when their Book and Burnham are going through and they're checking things out, they go to what to me looks like a transporter room, and there's blankets and the stuffed animal. And she says, why would someone want us to see this? Who would stage a transporter room with sleeping bags and clothes and children's stuff? That line does not make sense to me. And is the trinket that she held, Is that really the clue, or is that just a red herring that Burnham made up?
Red herring.
Okay.
Yeah, she didn't want Locke to know what that he actually had the actual device clue.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I think with that, that line kind of bothers me too. And I don't think it was staged. I think, there's potentially this, something catastrophic. People couldn't sleep in their quarters because something happened in a certain area of the ship. They were sleeping in the transporter room and they left because they all left. It's a bunch of pods that left, so they weren't on the ship anymore. So I think the line was unnecessary. I think going in just kind of helped relate to that story of like these people were coming from the Terran Empire. They escaped it, came into this timeline in this universe, because later in the episode it talks about Dr. Cho and, she joined Starfleet on this side and things like that. So I think, these people had lives beyond being, we're the Terran Empire, blah, 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 that we normally see, obviously, the stuffed animals and things like that. I think it was just to humanize them more, because what we do get of the mirror universe is these gruff people who are all at each other, and you can't trust Adam, you can't trust anybody, even like in your own family. So I think it was to more make them human and give them these stories. But I think the line was really not necessary.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that also. I think that it's possible that we don't have an exact timeline of when Terrans kind of lost that power, and then the Cardassian Klingon Empire kind of took over, and then humans became the subspecies and were slaves and stuff like that, which we saw in Deep Space Nine. Maybe it's possible that these were a bunch of renegades that escaped and were kind of just using the ISS Enterprise as kind of a place to hide. I also think that it's possible that maybe that line was thrown in there prior to the knowledge that this was going to be the final season. And who knows if they had plans to expand upon what happened in the mirror universe later down the road in a season 6 or a season 7. And I know that they made changes to how the season is going to end with the series finale. And that may be something that they just didn't get to do with time constraints and such. Just a possible thought.
We're going to have a little more discussion on the ISS Enterprise too a little bit later too.
Okay, but I know, Kyle, it's driving you crazy, but I have another question. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to say this, that there is a possible use for the ISS Enterprise in a future Star Trek project.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, well, yeah. Section 31. Yeah. Yep. So, okay, answer me this, because you're doing so far so good. The clue that they're getting was put in the wormhole, and then the wormhole was degraded because of the burn. I get that. But the clue from the person who we know dotted the clues everywhere was that Romulan guy from TNG, right? That guy? That's 24th century. Then how is this clue getting from 22nd century? If it was put in the ISS Mirror Universe Enterprise,
I don't think we know that for a fact, though. I don't think we know that for a fact. I think what we can go by what we're seeing in this episode is that unstable wormhole has been there for a long time, and I took it as the Enterprise has been trapped there for a very long time. Right. So that over the course of time, when they decided that they needed to hide these pieces all over the galaxy, they decided at that point to go to that location, get into that mirror universe little hole, and put it in there. Yeah. That's what my thought.
Okay, that works. I'll buy that, although I don't think that's a good explanation, but I buy that. Okay, Kyle, thank you so much for indulging me in my questions.
That's not a problem. But One other thing we found out interesting is about smuggling tribbles in this episode. In one of the flashbacks, Maul jokes about making sure she didn't smuggle any tribbles on board. This seems to suggest that, yes, even in the 32nd century, tribbles are still possibly hazardous because they breathe so quickly and overrun spaceships and space stations. Of course, famously, the tribbles first appeared in The Trouble with Tribbles. And then, though in Picard Season 3, we did see a genetically engineered attack tribble with vicious teeth stowed away in Section 31 Black Ops lab. It's possible this attack tribble was created during the Dominion War, which means it might have been designed to fight the Breen, who were Dominion allies back then. Never trust a tribble. That's all I'm saying.
No,
Never.
and I have an attack tribble down there.
Yeah, we gathered that. I have a couple.
Wow.
Mine are in docile modes right now, so we're good.
This one is very much like my Klingon tribble, Mirror Universe tribble that I have that's got teeth and is staring at me from the floor.
Ooh.
Now, Haley, I think it's very appropriate that you read our last piece of trivia because of who it involves.
Of course. Hit it? Really? As Book is navigating the ISS Enterprise out of the wormhole, he says, "Should we hit it?" Book has no idea that "hit it" was Pike's catchphrase to send a ship into warp. Burnham smiles sheepishly and responds, "Feels weird. Let's just fly." She feels weird because she doesn't want to steal Pike's catchphrase, and so she uses her own catchphrase, "Let's fly" instead. I like "hit it." I like it. I think it's second to engage for me. Yeah. So,
yep.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah. I would agree too. But it's time to get into some of the points of this episode here, that things that we want to highlight a little more. So, again, we are the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network at BQN, and we're discussing everything Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 5, Mirrors. And guys, what I want to do right now is get into some of the key points and storylines of this episode. And I think the big one, obviously, is getting finally the backstory on Maul and Locke, and finding out, of course, that Locke is Breen. Looks like he's maybe even part of the hierarchy of the Breen, or has some family ties to it. And of course, we've kind of known a little bit of Maul's backstory with her connection to the book. I'll start with you. What did you think of how did they give too much time to the backstory of Maul in this episode? Did you like their explanations behind them, or was it you felt like maybe we could have given more time to other aspects of this?
I don't necessarily think it took too long. I think that in past seasons of Discovery, they've taken way too long to get things out in the open, like 8 episodes too long. So I was okay with this. And the backstory is very interesting. What I didn't like, if you want to tie it back with the backstory, with Maul is, okay, she's been a criminal. I don't know if that's the right word, or she's been on the run with Locke for years. And anybody watching the show, I can't be the only person who's sitting watching her talk with Book saying, do you really think that she is going to fall for the talk that he is giving her right now, and that she's going to be all okay, and she's going to be like, all right, I'm going to go with you guys and everything's going to be fine? I just thought that was not the way to tie a very interesting and deadly backstory with the possibility of Book talking her out of doing anything that could threaten the Federation and the galaxy with this progenitor technology.
Haley, what about you? What did you think?
Well, and like I said before, I liked that we got this backstory into these two characters. I mean, we obviously knew, they've been tied to each other for quite some time and have like a deep bond. So I liked the backstory of what led them to coming in together. And like I said earlier as well, not surprised at all of how the situation went. Book trying to connect to her, I totally saw that coming because, again, he's wanted to. That's been his plan. Oh, I can connect to her and I'll get through to her. And you've got like 20 some odd years of angst and anger to get through. It's going to take more than like one conversation. And so I'm not surprised that they took off and whatnot. I think Locke would have kind of came in more than Maul. But again, I appreciated seeing where they're coming from, and the Breen hierarchy is interesting. So that's kind of neat, where he's, it's almost like in all the, fairy tales and lores that we have of, the prince comes up and the uncle wants the power. And so he knocks the prince down because he wants to be in control, and he wants his side and his faction to be the one in charge. So I like that continuation of how we kind of have this in a lot of stories anyway, in mythology as well.
Amy, what about you? I mean, obviously we have I'm going to be a little bit. We have Jello mold Breen here.
Maybe their suits hold them together. Like maybe they don't keep form. I don't know. Anyway,
but what did you think of the Maul and Locke story? And did it take up too much of the episode?
No, it did not for me. Excuse me. I liked learning about Locke and the Breen, and especially like his connection, like his uncle running, that station or whatever. So there's some dynamics with him being a leader in his own right, but still under his uncle. I liked, again, I'm very curious to know about the two faces that they have, and how Maul was so like in a safe place that Locke could reveal that, and how he changed his perception of, okay, we have two faces. And then when he showed it to his uncle's like, how dare you show that face? And it's like, you can see that there's this change where it's like, well, if this is part of me and I want to love me, then I need to love all of me. And I think that point was just too buried in this story, because that's a beautiful story to tell. And my last thing is that Maul, is she a predator? Because she came when we saw the flashback, she pointed him out. Oh, so you're the nephew. Your name is Locke. You're and like, she knew all about him. And he's like, well, who are you? And then, slowly they fell in love. But it was that initial one where I'm like, why does she know so much about him? I don't know. It was fishy to me, but I do like their love story and going to fight against it all. And you're the only ones that you can count on.
Well, I think to your question, her being a courier, it's to her benefit to have as much information as she can, maybe to find a weak point she can use. And maybe that was her intent with Locke at first, and then it became something else.
Okay.
So that's kind of the impression I got.
I have a quick question with regards to, first of all, two comments. One, as soon as he shot the uncle in the shoulder instead of killing him, I'm like, dude, that was a big mistake. Why did you do that? That was mistake number one. Did anyone get a Mandalorian feel with the whole showing their real face instead of wearing the mask the whole time? Not to take away from it, because I thought it was a great scene, but I kind of was like, oh, okay, this is the way. I kind of was like, all right, so they're not supposed to take their mask off in front of people.
Yeah, I heard the music go, Mandalorian music theme song go.
Grogu was running around in the background. You just didn't see him. Okay, guys, I want to get into the next topic, which I'm calling relationships, because the relationships were pretty much the key point of this episode. Obviously we've talked Maul and Locke, but Book and Burnham, kind of maybe the ice breaking again between them, working together. We saw a little bit of it in the last episode, especially for Burnham having that moment with time. She was time slipping with Book and kind of maybe reawakening her emotions a little bit that she's been trying to keep suppressed. And I'll say it again. The pairing of Sonequa and David is just fire on screen. Those two play off of each other. I'm gonna be sacrilege. I think they play off of each other better than Riker and Troy. But we see their relationship, and what's interesting here is they're almost like the parents in this episode, because they are trying to use their own relationship experience to help Maul and Locke make some decisions and not make decisions entirely based out of emotion. So I found this interesting in this aspect that we're seeing a different stage of this Book Burnham relationship, which I'm hoping by the end of the season gets them actually back together. But Amy, I when we're talking about Book, I have to go to you first because it's Book.
Yeah, he's great. I definitely, I've said it. I want them to work out. I think they are a good, healthy couple that I would like to see more. I mean, it started with Ash Tyler and that relationship didn't work. That wasn't healthy. She's grown. She's now captain. She's ready to take on a mature relationship, and I'm all for it.
Dan, what about you? What have your feelings been on the Burnham Book relationship?
I think if anybody doesn't think that they're going to be back together by the end of this series is crazy. Unless for some ridiculous reason they decide to kill off one of them. I just don't see that happening. They've been planting that seed since the end of last season. I think that that's definitely going to happen. I did appreciate the aspect of what Burnham was doing in sickbay a little bit more than I did with what Book was doing on the bridge. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Cleveland Booker was not his biological father. So no. I was kind of having a hard time with the connection that he was trying to make with her about being family. It was a stretch. He was doing whatever he could to try to get her to come around. It just didn't seem as focused and as well done as with what Burnham was doing in sickbay with Locke.
I liked that he finally pulled the Quajon card because I think that's a stronger connection to your point, Dan.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
What about you, Haley? A little Book Burnham? Are you in on the heart of I Heart Book Burnham?
I do think that they are a good relationship. You know, we ship the ships, right? And so I like that concept of them getting back together. I think that would be healthy for both of them. To your point, Dan, you know, as someone who's adopted and whatnot, just because Cleveland Booker wasn't Book's dad, doesn't mean that, you know, he wasn't raised by him. He didn't have a connection. You know, he had that connection with him because, you know, Book lost his own father. We don't know exactly how old he was, but my guess is probably from a young age. And so he kind of has that father figure. Cleveland Booker does to Book. Agreed, yep, and so, you know, that's why he says, you know, we're not blood family, but we're still family. And, you know, as a lot of people say, I say this, you know, the family we choose sometimes means more than the family we're born with. And so I think that's why he was trying to make that connection to her through that avenue, but, you know, not knowing the pain that she has regarding her father. Obviously, you know, it's something that is going to bring up a lot. I think there's going to be some connection made, maybe hopefully towards the end with these two. But it's going to take her kind of understanding that anger that she's holding on to isn't serving her purpose whatsoever.
Right. I think, Haley, you brought up a point that I agree with as far as, too, with Book. I mean, this is a man who was basically lost everything at this point. So all of a sudden, here's somebody who is biologically the daughter of the man he considers his father figure. So, yeah, it makes sense that he would feel a sense of kinship with her, because, and especially when you're searching for, when you've lost everything, and anything that feels like a connection becomes that much more important. And especially when you're talking about, especially the lifestyle of the courier and things like that, where you don't have a lot of ties to a lot of people. And I think too, for Book, is that trying to make sure she is okay is not only kind of a family thing, but he's honoring his mentor by protecting his daughter. And that is something that's important to him. So I think they need to kind of either press the gas on this a little bit and kind of get it more going, or work some different angles than what they did in this episode, because I'm so fascinated by what this relationship could be, but it felt very paint by numbers in how he handled it, and predictable in how he handled it in this episode.
That's a great description. Paint by numbers is spot on. I like that. That's good.
So, now, the other relationship that I was wanting to talk about too is one they've been kind of started with the last couple weeks is Rayner and the crew, because I really enjoyed Rayner this season. I think he's a great contrast to Michael Burnham, but what I've really found interesting is to see his character growth, and we see in this episode him actually doing what Burnham has been trying to teach him to do, to pull the ideas from all the crew, let the crew contribute. It's just not one thing, but you can still see him kind of fighting his own instinct with all of this. And I think he's been a really fresh addition to this season of Discovery, and just brought an interesting new dynamic to it. And it's fun to watch this play out, Haley.
Yeah, well, and to pull in from the Ready Room, because hey, I watched it. Is his character has gone through a lot. We don't know how old he is. It could be kind of like the Vulcans, where they live a really, really long time, and so he's got all these years of how he's been and how he's been a captain and how he sees Starfleet and how he views leadership. And everyone views leadership differently and takes a different stride in that. And so to be upset that his character is kind of pushing against how Discovery has their leadership set up and how the crew works together, it's understandable, because he's got who knows how many years, decades, centuries, whatever, of the way he's done things and the way he's known things to to kind of go up against something new, and change is hard and change is difficult. And so I kind of like when he struggles with it, because you can see him going, okay, to Stamets, short sentence, like brief, really be brief. He doesn't have time for details. But then when he takes a minute and he pauses, he's like, okay, wait, give me some more details. And I like this inner struggle of him going through learning that he can take in more ideas and take more from other crew, but this internal struggle that he's having with it, because it's something that we all have when we're trying to change something major habits that we've had for years, that we know are not healthy for us and ways we need to be. And so I like that, because this isn't an alien race that's having a very human struggle.
Haley, Amy, what about you? What have you thought of Rayner so far?
Yeah, like I said, it's the predictable storyline of them all, and I'm trying to grasp, and I love what you're saying. You're right. He is this old man who has a lot of experience, but my goodness, you can't tell me that you aren't flexible in your leadership style. Oh, it's just a lot to bite off for someone as seasoned, as someone who has been around, who knows Starfleet comes and goes, especially living through the burn. Like, no, you've got to be flexible, and I'm just not buying it. But I know I like what he's pulling out. It just doesn't connect to me. That's all.
Dan, I can see you wanted to say something. I got to say this.
Chop it at the bit. I have to drop off in a couple of minutes, but I want to talk about that for a second. I appreciate what you're saying, Amy, but I have two words for you: Captain Jellicoe. Captain Jellicoe never changed anything that he did once he became captain of the Enterprise in Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2. I love the fact that this character has been brought into Discovery to be the way that he is. He's got this incredible internal struggle that Haley talked about. He's been captain of another ship for who knows how long. I forget the number of years they said it, but I just don't recall right now. And then he got demoted for being a jackass. And so he's got a huge chip on his shoulder, and he's being that way to everybody. And then he starts to see what Michael is saying and how the crew works. Is it predictable? Absolutely. But I think that this character has really done a great job of, I'm going to do what you say because you're the captain. And then as soon as she leaves, he's himself again. And it takes Tilly to scream at him pretty much to get him to kind of start listening to what's going on. I love the struggle. I love the way that he's coming to terms with it. And I love the reaction that he's giving once he starts to accept that it's actually working on this ship where it might not have worked on his ship. But I don't see, I could never see a Jellicoe not being any different than what we're seeing with Rayner when he became first officer of Discovery, and he had his set ways and he wasn't really looking to make any changes at all.
I would also say, would Kirk really abide by the Burnham method?
If he was first officer, damn straight he would. I'm sorry. And same with Jellicoe. Jellicoe would have followed Picard had he been demoted to first officer. Jellicoe's in a captain position. And I do believe, even a jerk as he is, he would have followed Picard.
If he was the first officer?
Yeah.
No.
Well, we also have to wonder, the Ready Room, we'll pull that in again. I know we'll talk about it, but, he talked about, they pulled this race from Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
There was an episode of it.
Right.
Perhaps, like the Vulcans are rigid and logical. Perhaps the race that he is, we don't know enough. He's portraying a race that really we didn't see much of. Maybe this race is very rigid and they're not open to ideas and suggestions and collaboration. Maybe that's part of this species. And so it could be not only his life that he's been through, but it could be part of his culture that, that collaboration isn't necessarily a thing. It's very much individualistic. So, I mean, there's a lot to it that we just don't have backstory for that we can kind of play with. So
see, again, you're fixing things in my head. I love it. This is why I podcast.
Dan, I know you need to take off, but I would like to get your input on one other thing real quick.
Sure.
If you have a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah, go right ahead.
It's the last thing I want to talk about with relationships, because this is just something personally that's kind of irked me with this season of Discovery. And I'm using this Culver Tilly moment as an example. Is like they hype this up like something really big is going on, and yet they maybe get a minute all throughout the episode to really talk about it. And it's something else that happens in this episode with how they write off Awasakun and Detmer, and just like the entire original bridge crew has been it's been a problem throughout Discovery, but for this to be the final season and this is how they're treating the original bridge crew, I'm really having problems with this.
Budget cuts again. That's what it comes down to me. I think that they decided to make changes with this being the final season. And it's affecting the product. You're not the only person. I have heard from so many people of how upset they were that there was no bridge crew really at all. And at one point, I forget if it was this episode or last week, where they didn't even have the regulars of the bridge crew in for most of the episode. They were like the Delta shift or something like that. People we've never seen before. It's aggravating. And to have a moment that we're seeing on screen here with the Doctor and Tilly, the scene was good between the two of them, but like you said, it's kind of like an afterthought. It was not a big deal. Unfortunately, the way that scene was done, I was more excited that there was a Ferengi bartender and a Morn alien sitting at the bar having a drink on Discovery as a nice nod to Deep Space Nine. And it's sad that was more important to me than what was actually being discussed between the two of them at that scene.
And Linus playing the piano.
Yeah.
Yes, Linus playing the piano. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Amy, what do you think on what I'm talking about, though, with the way... I mean, Doug Jones hasn't even been part of the credits the last two episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's reasons for that, but it's tough because we've known since season 1, we're not going to learn our bridge crew. And so now I'm almost feeling like we're the dumb ones who keep complaining about it when nothing is changing, the definition I'm talking about. So I have to be okay with it because I'm just never going to learn about the bridge crew. And when Rayner got put on and introduced to a whole brand new crew, I remember saying, here, who are these people? Why do we need a replacement bridge crew when we still don't even know our own original bridge crew? I still don't know, are these people from the 32nd century who have learned all the old workings of Discovery? Because I don't think they're from the 22nd century because they brought a skeleton crew. So that doesn't even make sense. Like it just, but I like Tilly. I mean, I love Tilly. She's amazing. Culber's great. And yes, again, it's just the story of, yeah, the doctor needs help too. We've seen that so many times. And yes, he needs help. So they're going to talk. I like it. It's just predictable again.
I like one of the, let me jump in on real quick with what you said, Amy, because I agree with you. But one of the things that I loved about earlier seasons of Discovery is especially when Pike first showed up and Pike sat in the captain's chair and he wanted to know about every member of the crew. And that's the first time, it was in season 2, that we actually had cameras on these people getting their story, their names and stuff like that. And then over the course of the next 2 seasons, we really did get some detail about a couple of the characters. And I really loved that. It was great to see because it's a huge set. That bridge is gigantic. And if you're looking at one part of your TV screen, you're not going to see what 3 or 4 of the people are going to be doing on the other side of the screen. So I like that focus. And that is gone this season. Yeah. It's non-existent. And that's very disappointing, especially for the people that really love those crew members. I think because one of the great things about Star Trek is that relationship that the crew has with themselves, and especially the bridge crew. Excuse me, every one of the previous Star Trek shows, that bridge crew is close-knit. They know everything about each other, and they really are able to feed off of what's going on emotionally and everything like that. And it seems that it's just not there.
Yeah. I felt this conversation, like, it was nice that Tilly picked up on that, something was off and that, he's kind of struggling. And I love the characters. I love them both and whatnot. I'm a little tired of them throwing in that I died. Like, I get it, but it's also been how many years now? And whatnot. So like that, I think, is the thing that's bothering me. I liked that Dr. Culber was struggling with this idea of this progenitors and, what does this all mean? When we get to the end, like, what are we going to find? Because I think more of the crew should be talking about that. Like, we're going to the progenitors, people. Like, we're going to find their technology. We're going to find that. Like, what does that mean for us and life as we know it in the universe? Because, I mean, if you've watched the episode from TNG, you know that they created all of life. And they were the start of it. And so, like, I think that struggle and that internal struggle is missing. And so I liked that, Culber is kind of like, what does that mean? And Tilly's saying, yeah, it's a philosophical, it's a logical, it's a spiritual question. Like, what does that mean? I wanted a little more of the conversation of that, but I think that's also something I'd like from the rest of the crew. Like, people who know what they're doing on the crew, no matter what level they're at, should be like, what does this mean for us? Like, when we get there, when we get to the end of this, like, what are we going to find? What are we going to do? Like, what does this mean? Because that is a very human question. What does life mean? What does our existence mean? Where do we come from? And do you believe in evolution? Do you believe, the spiritual, that we were placed here by some God? And so I think that conversation would be happening more amongst the crew. And so it was nice to see that was something that was actually brought up. But I did love the Ferengi.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was a complete missed opportunity with the whole Culber thing too was, here we had just this last episode a couple episodes ago where he was possessed by and they told him, this is going to be a highly emotional experience where you're going to be experiencing things. It was a perfect thing to carry over, and for him to be having that conversation with Tilly, where maybe he can't have that conversation with Paul, and add that little bit of aspect to it. I think that would have been, instead of going back, I died again, using that to be the catalyst for.
Do you think that could have been the catalyst without them actually saying it was a catalyst, though? Because
it could have been, but again, I think, sometimes you need to. You could have dropped it. He could have just dropped a line, and after what I went through with Trill adding on to that, I mean, and I think it could have been a catalyst, but just a little bit of recognition in that moment. It takes one simple line. It's not anything that has to go into a deep thing, but you could have just said, between my death and this experience I just had of basically watching somebody else control my body.
Or he could have just said, with my past experiences, because it's not like Tilly doesn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't need to bring it up again, with what I've gone through already in my life, and then go from there. Like when we all get together with friends or whatever, and we're having conversations, well, and blah, 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 and blah, 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 your friends know what you've gone through. You don't have to constantly drag it up every single time to bounce off into why you're also feeling whatever it is that you're feeling. Rehash your whole life every single time you talk to somebody. So
yeah.
I think the writers are definitely on this fine line balancing act of getting criticism of, they just reset button, everything's fine, of course, classic Trek it. But, they will still get criticisms with current day. This problem would be with you for a long time. And Star Trek just, I'm all better. Well, then you get in the hazard of, they keep going on and on about it. I get the fine line, and I just sort of you know what? I know it's difficult times in my life that I can be fine. And then just something will come up and it's this sucks. And then you sort of have to reprocess. And I feel like healthy people do that. And so I'm hoping that where you can just say, he's still processing it, doing a good job, but every once in a while it's going to come up. And so, maybe reach out to someone. But I get what you're saying. Get over it. But
Now, Dan, you said you had to get going on us, but before you go, I want to give you a chance to plug some stuff that's going on with Trek Geeks.
There's not a lot going on with Trek Geeks right now. I got to say, of course, all the shows on the network are doing a great job. But Bill and I right now are in a little bit of a lull. Bill is in the process of moving right now.
That'll do it to anybody.
So we don't have any new stuff coming out for the next couple of weeks. I'm leaving for Disney in a couple of days, so that ties into that. But we are going to be back hopefully in a couple of weeks, starting to churn out some episodes again. But you got all the other shows on the network to fill your ears instead of listening to two dumb guys from New Hampshire. Well, I can't say that anymore because he doesn't live in New Hampshire anymore.
Yeah.
So I said to him the other day, I said, you know how much time you are going to save now that you're in North Carolina, that when you're filling out an online form, when you get to the state field, you only have to hit N once instead of 3 times. That's just fantastic. That's a reason to move right in itself.
Yeah, there you go.
Now you can say one smart guy from New Hampshire and a dumb guy from North Carolina.
Absolutely. And that is now the new tagline for Trek Geeks starting next time.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm in an N state too. I have to hit the N a couple times to get to Nevada.
A couple times, yeah. Yep.
I'm in Florida, so it's a whole other set of problems.
Let me just say also, I am very excited that I was able to sit here and talk about this with you guys tonight. I haven't had really sat down and done any podcasting for a few weeks, so it's really great. It's great to see everybody. It's great to know that we still have Star Trek going on, and there's still some great opinions out there. And like I said, I'm not sure exactly when Bill and I are going to be firing it up, probably within the next 3 weeks. So if you have room,
there is always a chair on the Good Ship Union Federation.
You guys again.
Yeah, no, there's always a chair anytime you want. We promise we won't put you in the P corner.
Oh, I might want to be in the P corner. I really have no idea. Okay, I don't want to be in the P corner.
No,
guys, it's great to see everybody. Enjoy the rest of the season, and I'll be happy to come back and talk about it some more.
You're welcome anytime, Dan.
All right, take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
So special thanks to Dan for hopping in and joining us. But we have one more thing I want to talk about real quick, ladies, and that is the ISS Enterprise. Because I was not expecting this. I'm going to be honest with you. This was about the last thing I expected in this episode. And I've got a few little pieces of information about this. So obviously inside the wormhole, Book and Burnham encounter the ISS Enterprise, and Book says right away, ISS, that's Mirror Universe. When he says this, we hear the Mirror Universe music from Discovery Season 1. So playing with a little bit of the music theme there. there. The existence of the ISS Enterprise in this episode is a massive Easter egg, which contains various other small Easter eggs, including the following. The ISS Enterprise was last seen in canon in the TOS episode Mirror Mirror. So chronologically, in both our world and the Trek timeline, this is its second appearance. The bridge and sickbay of the ISS Enterprise are just the sets from Strange New Worlds version of Enterprise. Discovery Season 5 filmed in between seasons of Strange New Worlds, so they had access to them. Several versions of the Terran Empire logo are seen throughout the ship. These match with the Terran Empire logo from Discovery Season 1 and Season 3 and differ from the logo from the original series.
Yeah, I'm just going to comment on that because I saw the logos too in the most bizarre places. And I'm like, oh, they just had to put this, logo so that we know we're Terran. Yep. It was obvious.
So here we go. Does the redesign make sense in terms of the timeline? Well, Akiva Goldsmith has suggested that on some level, the visual canon of Strange New Worlds relative to the original series isn't the true canon. In 2023, he said that the aesthetic choices of the more modern Strange New Worlds don't change the story as seen on TOS, but it does mean modern Star Trek will never reveal a rubber-suited Gorn. You will never see the Gorn like that. This is the Gorn as we perceive them, Goldsman said. So analogically, Discovery didn't need to make the TOS Mirror Enterprise like the retro 1960 version. Plus, who knows what the Terran Empire did in between Mirror Mirror and the moment this crew escaped. Now, also, the ISS Enterprise now in the Prime universe. The episode ends with the ISS Enterprise being fully intact in the Prime universe. We're told Detmer and Awo are flying the ship back to Federation HQ on their own. Scotty was able to fly the classic Enterprise with just himself and Sulu in the search for Spock, so we have to assume Detmer and Awo can have done something similar. We don't know if a 32nd century Enterprise exists in this era of Star Trek, but as of now, Discovery just brought a classic version of the ship into the future. And because of the upcoming Starfleet Academy series set in the 32nd century, it feels possible that Discovery just created a way for the students of the future Starfleet to hang out on the bridge of the classic Enterprise again.
Oh, that's cool to think about.
So, you guys have any other comment? We talked about it a little bit. Do you guys have any other thoughts on the ISS Enterprise being in this episode, Haley?
Okay, yes, this was probably the big surprise for me. I was not expecting to see the ISS Enterprise. Like Amy, we didn't need to have the Mirror Universe logos like on the walls. I thought it was cool that they put them on the doors. So when the doors closed, like that was a neat touch. Like I could see that because it's the ISS Enterprise, and everyone who watches Star Trek at all knows ISS means the Mirror Universe, means the Terran Empire. It does not mean our normal empire. So we don't need that. To this last little bullet point that you talked about and like using the Strange New World set, yes, I can see where like that is kind of like, all right, to fit the Enterprise into this episode. But again, with budget cuts, using what they already have, it makes sense. But to this last thing of like where the Strange New World set is different and it doesn't look like this original series and blah, blah, blah. Anytime people bring that up, I just like one of my kiddo clients, we were talking about movies, and I asked if they had seen, and I don't remember what it was. Anyway, they wanted to watch the new Jurassic movies. And I said, well, have you seen the original first one? And he's like, no. And I'm like, why not? It's the best one. And you wouldn't have all these other ones if it hadn't been for that one. And went off about, they went off on like the CGI and all that stuff. And I said, hold on. And this applies to this. They did the best they could with what they had at the time. Yes, I will never complain that like Strange New World set doesn't look pre-TOS because that was in the 60s and they didn't have the stuff that we have now. Just as in 10 years from now, stuff that we're watching now is going to probably look crappy to the technology and whatnot we're going to have in 10, 20 years from now, just as watching some episodes of TNG now, which are almost as old as me, they look kind of crappy compared to now. Like, it's apples and oranges. Don't complain about it because, seriously, it's a moot point. But it was nice to see, and I do like this idea that now we have an Enterprise, even though it's a mirror Enterprise, in our universe in Discovery. It's pretty cool.
Yes, it is. Amy, any other thoughts on the ISS?
Nope, it's cool. I like it.
I'm curious to see what they're going to do with it because they didn't bring this in to not do anything with this. There's something that's going to be happening with this before it's all said and done.
It's going to sit in the museum. Hello.
Well,
Geordi's, ancestors of who knows how many generations now at this point is running the museum, the Fleet Museum, and they're going to study it. And who knows, maybe in something future, the technology is going to be helpful because, hey, it can't be hacked, or something like that because it's, pre all the ships being collectively put together kind of stuff. I don't know.
We'll figure it out. In the meantime, as I'm getting an attack triple run quickly across my screen, let's teleport into our second away mission and talk some Ready Room. So yes, it is away mission number 2, and it's time to talk to Ready Room, hosted by Wil Wheaton. And of course, this week he had a very special guest as Callum Keith Rennie, who plays Raynor, came on to the Ready Room. Yet again, we've talked about budget cuts the last couple of weeks, and I think the Ready Room is feeling it more than anything else. Though Will seemed to have his normal setback this week, but in this episode, Keith Raynor talks to Wil Wheaton about joining the Star Trek family and the dynamics his character brings to Star Trek Discovery's final season. Plus, we learned everything you need to know about this season's antagonist, the Breen. Okay, so first question. We know Haley's watched it. Have you watched it, Amy?
I have.
Oh, it is a victory day on the Union Federation. Mark the date. We've all watched the Ready Room.
Woohoo!
So I want to ask each of you, Amy, what were some of the things that you pulled out of this episode of the Ready Room that grabbed your interest?
It's really cute that Colum can't do the Vulcan salute. That was really cute at the beginning, and he tried both hands. It was so cute.
It takes practice.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I really enjoyed listening to him. I wish we had more time with him. And I put it in our little text and before, but I feel like Will has given a warmer welcome to Star Trek family, like better than he did here. Like usually when it's a first person, like Strange New World cast, welcome to the family, da 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 da. And I didn't feel like he got this, and he is important. He's more important than Owo and Detmer, right? We are learning more about him, and I just wanted that warmer welcome from Will. But I know it has nothing to do with what the actual Ready Room was on. But you asked me my thoughts, and that's what they are.
Oh, but I think that's a good point, and I do wonder if with these shorter episodes and how they edit these episodes, that comes across a little bit too, because there was times where Will seemed like towards the end of the interview, he felt a little bit warmer and more the Will we know. And, it's somebody who's brand new. Maybe this was his actual first time meeting him at all. And so, it's hard to say, but I do think that the way that episode was edited, maybe came across a little bit. But what I really liked was when Callum was talking about how they basically gave him carte blanche to do with this character because this race has such little history in Star Trek. And I think how cool is that they're basically, you are coming in the final season of a Star Trek show and they're saying, do what you want with this character. Here's a basic parameter, but go for it. To have that kind of freedom, that's a really cool deal.
Yeah, I liked, I've already talked about it, but I like that, he mentioned he grew up watching the original series. That was his thing. He probably was busy acting and working, so he didn't really catch anything else, but he grew up watching the original series. So it's nice to know that it's not completely foreign to him. And to your guys' point, Amy, I think it's editing, because I was watching and it seemed like like the conversation and that there was more to it, but I think the way that they're editing these so that they're shorter, I think that's how it's coming across of why it seems like maybe Wil wasn't as chatty, because I didn't get that vibe. I think it's just the editing. They cut some of the conversation off. Like there was one point where I think it was Wil when he was asking him, hey, did you watch, they were talking about watching Star Trek and growing up with it and, his ability to, create this character. The question, I could tell that Wil they had talked more, but the editing spliced so that it was shorter. And so I think it's the editing more so than like Wil. Because, Wil's always warm to everybody. So I think it's editing. I don't think it's anything like that. I think it really is just the editing process.
One of the other things that this episode did, too, is it gave us a pretty interesting history of the Breen, which, for a lot of Trek fans, except for that one episode of DS9, they don't have a lot of experience to them. And talking about that, I want to ask you guys this because is it just me, or does it feel like a lot of this newer era of Trek has really used DS9 to pull a lot of history from and a lot of storylines from? Even obviously Picard had everything with the Next Generation, but there were still some DS9 connections in Picard as well. It just feels like a lot of this has been DS9 has really gotten a big boost from this modern era of Trek because it's just pulled a lot of things from the history of DS9. In it. Maybe it's just me, but it's just something I've observed. It feels like there's a lot more DS9 history being pulled into this era.
Well, I think some would still argue that it's not enough.
I would agree. I can see where the argument point is, but still, it seems like DS9 more than any of the others outside of, obviously Next Gen with Picard is going to get that love, but the rest of them, a lot of DS9, a little bit of Voyager here and there, mainly with Lower Decks, but yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's because, the Deep Space Nine overall was about the war, but I think there was a lot of like little things, that were just something small, or, we had a few times because we saw the Breen in TNG, and then we got a little more of them in a few episodes of Deep Space Nine. And so because it isn't so fleshed out, they're saying, let's use this because it is such a throwback, but there's not a lot to it. Like Raynor's character, they were in one episode of Deep Space Nine. I think it was just something that they can say, okay, there's not a lot of lore and backstory to this, that we can add more to it, and we can kind of fudge and we can kind of make it how we want to make it by pulling it. And so there is just a lot of little ties to Deep Space Nine, just because there was so much just kind of little things just dropped in episodes in, B or C plots.
Yeah. So I have a question for you both, because Michelle Paradise in the Ready Room was talking about the Breen and how we know nothing about them and how awesome and interesting that makes it. And I agree. But then I got thinking, okay, well, the Gorns, same thing. We saw them in TOS, and then they got reimagined. They're the new baddies for Strange New World. I get it, because we don't know their what motivates them, So I'm going along with that. And I'm like, that was the exact same reason that they gave the Borg. Like, we didn't know anything about it, so they're going to be the big baddie. But then some people criticize that in Voyager, they took the Borg and they, made them docile, and now they're not the big baddies like they used to be. Do you think that the Breen will get that way? Like,
I don't think we have enough.
I
don't think we have enough season left in this season for them to be able to do that with the Breen. But if anything, then realistically, this was the first time we've seen the Breen outside of finding out Locke is Breen. This is the first time we've seen the Breen really all season. So how much more are we going to see of them? Again, this comes down to a classic Discovery problem. We're halfway through the season, and there's still a lot to wrap up in 5 episodes. And so how much of the brain are we going to get? How menacing are they going to make the brain? Because we still have the progenitors, everything with the progenitors. They're still searching for clues. We still have. There's a lot of dangling plot threads for 5 episodes left of a series, and that's always been one of my knocks on the Discovery writing team is that they don't seem. They always seem to like try to corner so much into the season finale instead of trying to just tie up some plot threads as they go along. So I think that's going to be interesting. The question will be, I think, is going to be in whatever future Trek we get, will the brain be part of that? And could that be what waters down the brain?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also a matter of, how much have the brain been a threat now? This is the first, they're kind of talking about it. So it almost seems like, again, there's really no backstory to say, like, currently how much of a threat the brain are, so who knows even how dangerous they are anyway. It could be like mildly dangerous. Like to me, it doesn't feel like they're a big, huge threat. Like, yes, Burnham and Raynor, they jump into the future. The brain had gotten the progenitor technology and everything was destroyed. Because again, that's the plot point with Discovery. There's always some big universe ending catastrophe that they have to stop. And so that sets you up to think that the brain are super, super dangerous. But maybe not. Maybe it's something where the brain got the technology and there was an accident. They didn't mean to completely destroy all life in the universe, because if you think about it, maybe the progenitors also made them. I mean, if the progenitors created all humanoid species, that means that they also potentially did something to create the brain. And so the brain would also be wiped out, right? So maybe, that future that could potentially happen is an accident. Maybe the brain aren't as like a big giant threat. It's just we've never encountered them before. And so it seems like it's a threat, but maybe it's really not. Maybe it's just we have to come to an understanding of each other. Which is very Trek.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
10C.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, let's jump ahead a little bit because I think it's time to look into the Orb of Prophecy. Can talk about what we are going to be getting in next week's episode, which is entitled Whistle Speak. And guys, I'm just going to say it right now. Prime directive warning. We are violating the Prime directive next week. It's even they even say it on Wil Wheaton even brings it up on the radio room. Yeah, we're violating the Prime directive. Tilly and Burnham are looking to do a little undercover for their next search, and yeah, even in the clip that they showed on the ready room, yeah, you can feel it. The Prime directive is going to be violated at some point in this episode, Amy.
Yeah, Will talked about it for sure. So I'm just looking at those uniforms, like I'm getting a Cupid vibe, hunter gatherer.
I am not a merry man.
Yes.
Captain Burnham.
So it will be interesting to see what happens, but as always, all good things must come to an end, and it's time to intercept some subspace signals. Of course, you are watching this episode of the Union Federation podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel, or if you're listening to it, you're listening to either on the master feed of the Fandom Podcast Network or on the feed provided by the amazing BQN Network as well, giving you all things Trek, assimilating everything, the audio, my brain, your brain, everything in sight. It's spreading. It's getting bigger. Amy is the board queen. We just let her do her thing. And of course, the Fandom Podcast Network, we're not only the home of the Union Federation, but so many great podcasts covering so many things in fandom. Just real quick, I want to plug a couple shows we just put out. We have our show Time Warp, which we are now covering the movies and TV of 1984 in our April episode, our episode covering the month of April of 1984 came out. Some interesting movies, but much more interesting television in that time frame as well. So
yes,
Yeah.
just yes.
Yeah. And of course too, we have our Couch Potato Theaters going. We just did a very fun episode of Couch Potato Theater. Roadhouse. The new one is out on Amazon. We were blessed to have Anthony DeLongis, who, if you have seen the original Roadhouse, you probably know him as the guy wearing the bladed boot. And he came on and told us some stories of the set and told us about his amazing work. And if you're not familiar with Anthony DeLongis, not only is he an actor, he is an amazing stuntman and weapons master. He is the man who taught Michelle Pfeiffer how to use the whip on Batman Returns.
Ooh.
So if you have seen that footage too of her taking off the mannequin heads, he taught her how to do that. So just
nice.
So you can find the Fandom Podcast Network on there on its master feed at fpn.podbean.com. Of course, on any of your major podcast catchers, and of course, visit our YouTube channel. Just search for the Fandom Podcast Network. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share it out. We're trying, as always, to grow the channel as well. But we talked about it earlier, Amy, the BQN, assimilating all the audio, quizzes, table reads, all kinds of stuff going on. I can't keep track. You
Listen, you can find Union Federation on BQN. That's all you need to know. So just search anywhere on your podcast, wherever you listen, search Union Federation, and you will see it come right up. So we have other shows, but we want you listening to Union Federation podcast.
And of course, we are covering everything that is this final season of Star Trek Discovery. And it's been an interesting ride so far. I'm going to be curious to see where it goes. But before we get out of here, of course, I am Kyle in the captain's chair. You can find me on X/Twitter at AKyleW. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. You can also find me on Letterboxd at KSport16. You can find out what I've been watching. I need to get that caught up, but we were having some fun with Letterboxd. I think Kevin's up to like 200 movies now. He just watches like 5 a day. I think even in Australia with his wife. I don't know, but Amy, besides BQN, where can people find you on social media?
I am on Discord, Amy Nelson 522. I am on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. And yes, our Facebook group. And yeah, over there on BQN.
Yep. And I need to add, you can find me on Discord at AKyleW as well. Haley, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky, which is so much better version, at Trekkie01D.
And of course, she's pumping out science knowledge all over the internet. She just won't tell. It just pops up randomly. It's great. It's fun. But
it is.
Again, this is Union Federation. We've been covering Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 5, Mirrors. It's been a lot of fun. Of course, thank you to the wonderful crew. Thank you to Dan for hopping in. Hopefully, we will see him back on before the season is out. You ladies always bring the knowledge. I just kind of get to sit back and enjoy the ride. It's great. I've even figured out the inertial dampeners after being gone for so long, so I think we're good now. So with that, we are the funnest ship in the fleet. We have our own particular kind of crazy. But until next time, hailing frequencies are now closed.